All right, the Trump campaign has filed for a partial recount in the state of Wisconsin. If we recall, election night, President Trump had a hefty lead in the state, which has now turned into a losing margin of about 20,000 votes. With suspected voter fraud around the country, a close race like this could turn around. Now, that is if everyone plays by the rules. After a filing for a partial recall to the Wisconsin Election Commission, the same commission held a special meeting to change the rules on recount guidelines. How could those rules change the results? Well, joining me to answer that question, someone very familiar with the state of Wisconsin, former chairman of the GOP in Wisconsin, former head of the RNC, and former chief of staff to the President of the United States, my good friend Reince Priebus. Reince, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, I'm happy to be back. How are you?
I'm doing well. Fill us in on the politics of Wisconsin, where the Election Commission would change the rules after the Trump administration filed for a recount.
Well, it's pretty wild. So the Trump campaign filed for a recount in Wisconsin yesterday morning. They transferred $3 million to the Wisconsin Election Commission. And when they filed in their petition, and we can talk about it in a minute if you want to get into what the basis is, but in the petition filing, you actually list out, like an actual complaint in court, what your case is all about and what it is that you're seeking and what the basis of the recount that you're seeking is. Well, after that filing was submitted, the Wisconsin Election Commission said we need to have an emergency meeting of the Wisconsin Election Commission to discuss revising the recount manual. And the recount manual is the manual that gets sent to the clerks, and it's the instructions on how to conduct the recount. And so in that meeting, what they wanted to do was change the method by which a campaign could try to review absentee ballot request forms. And so one of the bases for the Trump campaign recount is that there weren't the appropriate absentee ballot request forms filled out by people that either voted early or voted by absentee ballot mail. And the Wisconsin Election Commission said, well, we're not going to allow you to review those request forms unless the number of absentee ballots was in question. So if you can't figure out how many absentee ballots were cast, then we'll let you look at the request forms. But we're not going to let you look at the request forms if you can figure out how many absentee ballots were actually cast. So just wild stuff. Turns out that the meeting went on until about 1 a.m. Eastern time, and there was a 3-3 tie on the committee all night long. And actually nothing was ultimately changed because the Republicans on the committee had to block all of these things all night long. Now, that was a mouthful, and apologize for going on too long, but that's really the snapshot of what happened.
I mean, that's kind of like an NFL game where you get a contested call, they do a replay, and in the midst of the replay, the other side decides they want to change the rules so that it would alter the outcome of the replay.
Well, it's exactly right. It's almost worse because what happened was the campaign sent $3 million on the basis of the rules that were in place. When you obviously, you've done this, Tony.
Yeah.
You review the case. Say, is it worth $3 million for us to go to Wisconsin and do a recount? And do we have a chance? Well, let's look at the rules. Well, here are the rules. This is what we're going to do. Okay, I think there is a chance, so let's send in the $3 million. You send in the $3 million, and then the Wisconsin Election Commission says, oh, well, let's look at the rules here. And now it changes everything. It's crazy.
I want to get, in a moment, I want to get to the basis of the petition, but more broadly speaking, and I know you're an attorney, you're also a straightforward guy. I've known you for years. And, I mean, you're not going to make allegations that don't have some kind of substance to them, nor am I. And so I'm not going to say that I know for a fact that there's voter fraud in a particular area. But I am going to say this. I've noticed a lot of this type of stuff that Wisconsin is doing, that no one has ever really forced focus on what's happening in some of these states. And now that a light is shining, it's like opening a door at night in an old house, and you see the cockroaches scattering when the light comes on. And I think that's what's happening.
Well, Wisconsin's had a long history of problems. Back in after the 2000 election, the 2004 election, the Milwaukee Police Department actually issued a 70-some page report. And it wasn't the party, it was the Milwaukee Police Department. And they listed out all kinds of problems that there were in Wisconsin. Things like felons voting, deceased people voting, registered voters at vacant lots and where billboards were. And, a lot of the fraud that was talked about in that report, it wasn't so much flat out cheating by people. It was court clerks not doing, or election clerks not doing their jobs, people that actually want to do a good job and they're well-intentioned, but because there's thousands of people showing up and IDs are flying all over the place, that things aren't followed. So a lot of the problems that take place are problems that are not as much intentional but as systematic failures.
And that's one thing.
System and rules.
That's one of the things I hope comes out of this. One of the two things I would actually like to see a positive outcome of the challenge, but one of the secondary issues would be to clean up our voting systems in some of these states that have been lax in enforcing the rules, so that we do have confidence in our system.
Well, you're 100% right, and that's one of the things that I think is also motivating folks in the Republican Party to get involved, and it's really to do exactly as you say. Once and for all, we've got the resources to go into a state like Wisconsin and say, okay, how are the clerks administering these absentee ballots? Why do we have folks that are confined to nursing homes? Why are those numbers 3 times higher this time than they were 4 years ago? And why are clerks filling in people's addresses and fixing absentee ballots? Why? Why is this stuff happening? And so now we get to ask those questions.
And we have someone in President Trump who's willing to challenge it and force the issue, where historically, quite frankly, most Republicans have not had the backbone to stand up and ask these questions on a national level. Earlier today, the campaign held a press conference, Rudy Giuliani, saying that they now have evidence to suggest that there is enough illegal votes out there that have been cast that could change the outcome of this election. Do you agree with him?
I don't know, Tony, because I'm so focused in on what's happening in Wisconsin. I have not dived into this entire issue that they're talking about with these voting machines. I just don't know much about it. What I know about Wisconsin is that we have, I think, potentially systematic failures in the overseeing of absentee ballot early voting, some of the issues in regard to how absentee ballots are handled, and also this issue with the elderly confined voters in Wisconsin. But as far as this other issue, I just honestly don't know much about
let me ask, let's focus on Wisconsin. Is there enough there that could potentially change the outcome of Wisconsin?
Yeah, there is, because, Wisconsin is not – here's the basis of their complaint. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not representing the campaign. I'm not on the ground, but I do understand the complaint. I was general counsel of the RNC before I was chairman, so this is an area that I spent a lot of time in. And basically, to keep it really simple, Wisconsin has never adopted the laws that it needs to become an early vote state. So we are not an early vote state. We don't have early voting in Wisconsin. But what's happened over the years is that the clerks in the Wisconsin Election Commission have allowed what's called in-person absentee ballot voting. And so what they're saying is, okay, you can vote early here at the clerk's office, but it's not early vote, it's absentee ballot voting. And in absentee ballot voting under the law, you actually have to request an absentee ballot before you get one. And so what you have in the state of Wisconsin are thousands and thousands of people that are potentially going into these precincts voting early or absentee ballot without actually filling out an absentee ballot request form. And so you have a rogue operation being conducted by clerks across the state of Wisconsin outside of the confines of the law and running their own operation. Well, it's not legal. It's not what the law allows. That's one thing. The second thing is the Wisconsin Election Commission has said to the clerks that they could fix or repair certain absentee ballots that were missing addresses. And so you have clerks repairing and fixing ballots to make them legal for people that were using the absentee ballot system, which, by the way, isn't appropriate under the law. The last thing is this confined voter rule. What the state of Wisconsin has said is that you actually have to be a confined voter and you need to show a photo identification. Well, what's happened now is that the folks in Wisconsin have tripled the amount of confined voters that are voting, and what they've said is the clerks have said you don't need a photo ID if you proclaim yourself to be confined.
Yeah, that makes it very suspicious and open to manipulation and abuse. Reince Priebus, as always, great to talk with you. We're out of time. We'll be checking in with you more in the days ahead. Thanks so much for being with us.